The acronym DMILS stands for Direct Mental Interaction in Living Systems. It was coined by William Broad, who set up this set of experiments, and he already had this problem that he wanted to find a very neutral description in order to allow for many possible explanations and not limited his research. So what he just made with direct mental interaction living system is just that he made a description of what he's doing. Okay, so direct refers to that you don't use any way of communication. You don't do it by cell phone, or you don't do it by knocking on the floor or things like that. It's a direct interaction between these people. In the beginning it was direct influence, but then they understood that an influence gives already a direction. So then it's direct interaction, direct mental interaction, because it's about an intention. I have an intention to change your physiology, for example, or to make you healthy from a distance. So I have an intention and I try to bring out of this intention something to you, to your body, to your behavior, whatever, okay? And because Broad also worked not only with humans, but also, for example, with blood samples and stuff like that, and with animals, he used the term living systems, okay? We here at our institute only do this with humans, but he also did it with living systems, in the sense, for example, that he had blood samples that degraded, and he had people from the distance asked to slowing down this degradation process of the blood samples, for example. Yeah, and that's when you work with with distant intention on a living system. So Broad tried a lot of paradigms. Okay, he was very active, very creative, and he developed kind of 10, 15 paradigms, I would say, in his active time. And 3 of these paradigms were in that sense successful, that they had good results and were replicated by other researchers, and then had also good results with other researchers. So out of this huge variety of experiments he started with, we have kind of 3 different ones that have been that gained the status of an experimental paradigm, that if you speak about it, everybody knows what it's done, and it's usually done in the same way. So because we don't get knowledge about by a single experiment. You have to always replicate it, and then you have to replicate it sometimes in an identical way. Sometimes you have to change a little bit to check all kind of different counter explanations to see whether whether you maybe still the possibility to explain it by a conventional explanation. Yeah? So you don't do one experiment and then well, there's a parapsychology effect, but you do a series of experiments. And out of the work of Broad, 3 series emerged, and we have done all 3 of them here. But with the one that we report here, or that you're showing in the television documentary here, is a mixture of 2 of them. Okay, and the mixture is one because we have 2 variables that we're looking for. We had this EDA. Yeah, that is one. That is the most successful paradigm. But we also had this button press, which is a behavioral variable. So we take one variable from the body, a physiological, and as a button press, we take another variable that's on the behavioral level, which is a crucial difference for us as researchers. All of these paradigms have 2 people, and one of the persons has an intention to do something from remote with the other person. In the EDA DMILS, the classical experiment, the task is to activate or to calm the other person from the distance. The person who is activated or calmed doesn't know anything about the timing, and the other person who's actively doing the intention gets on a screen the intention, now you activate this other person, or now you calm it. And we measure on that other person the EDA, the electrodermal activity, which is a physiological indicator of overall activity. Okay, so that's one paradigm. And then we can check in the times where this person is doing something to activate the remote person, is the remote person really more active, and also the other way around. And sometimes the EDA signal is even feedback to the first person, so that he or she can already see whether whatever she's doing is successful. Okay, so that's one paradigm. The second paradigm is remote staring. There's not so much about an intention, but what the one person is seeing is a screen that shows with a CCTV system the picture of the other person, and that's switched on or switched off. So that means the person can, for some minute, for example, or 30 seconds, see the other person and observe that person and stare at her or him. And in the control condition, this is not possible. And we are measuring on the person that is observed also the EDA. So we are looking whether there's some physiological signal in the body of the observed person that registers whether she is observed from remote, or whether she or he is stared at from remote. Okay, we're not asking, are you getting stared at? Yeah, like this is done in remote staring research. But we're asking the body, is the body sensing that there is a distant gaze, for example, through the camera system? The third paradigm is it's called attention facilitation focusing experiment, and there we ask one person to concentrate on an object, usually it's a candle, and to stay focused with the mind on that candle. And this is a difficult task. If you try to do that, you can do it perfectly fine for 10, 15, 20 seconds, but then your mind wanders away, and you have to put in additional effort to come back and to keep your mind stable on the candle. Okay? And we measuring whenever the mind is wandering away. We ask the people, when you notice that your mind wandered away, press a button, so we get a measure of distraction. And now we have a second person in a distant room that from times to times helps from the distant focusing. And how is this other person doing this? He or she has the same candle, more or less the same setup, and from time to time you get an intention on a screen or by some other means, now help this remote person. And then this helper, we speak about a helpee and a helper in that paradigm. That helper is now focusing himself also or herself also on a candle, and is connecting this focusing to the other person as a remote assistance, as a remote helping. What we're looking for is there an effect of distant intention, that these two people communicate, or that this remote helping or remote activity results in any effect. And why are we doing this? Because we have a vast literature on this experiment. As I said, this was replicated many times, and what is done in the field, and what we've done, is that you do a meta-analysis of all these experiments. This means you take all the experiments and statistically you move it into one large study. And this one large study, the meta-analysis, shows a significant effect. Very, very small. Not something probably that you realize on the individual level, but on the whole, the effect is so significant and it's really difficult to find an explanation for that. So we see, when you do a lot of studies and a lot of trial, obviously you find some anomaly. And now we're doing different studies in order to find out what is it about, how can we elicit it, which persons need to come, how needed to practice. In our last study, for example, we have invited trained meditators, because we thought, well, a trained meditator might be much better in focusing and keeping focused on the candle than some lay person taking from the street. Or another variable is like, it might be that the effects are so small in such a big series because only some people can do it. So there might be the idea that there are gifted persons who have psychic ability and most of the others don't have. So you take 100 people from the street, only one person can do that, makes a strong effect, and then you take the mean of everything and you have only this small effect. So that's why we worked also with a pre-selection of people. We let people do a simple psi test, asking them, like when you draw a number, do you know in advance which number that is? Tell us the number. They had to give us numbers from 1 to 5, and then they draw the number, and we looked whether they had more hits than expected. We did things like that, like in order to better understand this paradigm. the evidence is that's one thing is interesting. We have meta-analysis, that means meta-studies of all three paradigms, okay? And all three paradigms have more or less the exactly same small effect, okay? And that's therefore interesting because the question is in this remote staring experiment and the distant intention experiment and this helping experiment, are we investigating the same effect or something different? Because in one experiment you are staring at the people from the distance, and in the other one you're activating there. I mean, that you can say that's a different thing, or you can say, well, it's a similar thing because you always have a certain intention for the other person. And my assumption, my unproven assumption, is that because there's three different paradigms, but they result in the same effect size, very precisely, that there must be a common mechanism or common thing behind that. And if I look at these three paradigms and see what do they have in common, then it's the intention. So I have always this moment that I have one person who has certain intention, may it be to look at, to activate, or to help another person, and I measure that. So that's why I like to speak of distant intention studies or distant intention experiments, because I think the intention is the variable that is connecting these three paradigms. Let's assume it's a small effect. We don't notice in our daily life, yeah, but it's still there. Then it still violates a lot of our normal mainstream scientific assumptions, because there is some distant connection or interaction where our current physical worldview or our physical way to explain what's going on this planet cannot explain this. Yeah? And it's of course always where what I said in the beginning, where we want to look at where there's an incompleteness in our models of the world, an incompleteness that can explain that a lot of people have experiences science cannot explain. Yeah, this is always the starting point. People report experiences that science cannot explain, and that is the justification also to start to look in these cases. Is that possible? Yeah, do we find and is maybe also the way we describe mechanisms in our world, and we describe or conceptualize communications, the models, the scientific models that we make for the world, are they kind of incomplete, or is there something lacking? And we have to take one important, or we have to make one important observation. We don't know how the world is working. Yeah? We always make models about the world. That's what science is doing. Science is not about finding the truth. We thought that for a very long time. But the truth cannot be conceived by the scientific model, by the scientific method. What we can do is make models and test these models empiricals according to some rules that we have agreed upon as a social system of scientists. So science is a social practice of getting models and worldviews and confirming them. Yeah? Mm-hmm. But since it's all models and ideas, they never, that often it's said, don't mix the landscape with the map. And science is drawing the maps, okay? And every map might be that we need to adjust it in a different way in order that it fits the landscapes we are living in. Yeah, I think that's because I think it's very obvious that if these effects are true, then they are a challenge to the existent scientific or physical or whatever worldview. Okay, so it's a challenge to them, and of course, I think it's a good idea that if you have a solid model that has been proven to be a good description of the world, or a good description of what will come next, that you don't let it, oh well, that was wrong, I take it away, because there's just one anomaly or just one contradiction. So I think it's good to be skeptical about that. But on the other hand, very often, and this is even true on to scientists don't understand, natural scientists don't understand that it's only model building. They think it's truth like that, and then they think these ideas are unscientific because they don't fit to my scientific worldview, so they must be unscientific. And that's, if you, I think as a scientist, you're also obliged to study epistemology. This is the question, how does science come to knowledge? And you also need to study a little bit the sociology of science. That is, how is science working as a social practice, so that you understand that we are a community that creates models about the world, and that these models can be wrong, incomplete, have contradictions, that there can be another model that can be explained the same, although it's very different. I think this understanding of the scientific process needs to be have, but very often people have a different understanding from science. Rupert Sheldrake has the gift of making very simple experiments, and I think there's a lot of beauty in these experiments. And one of these is the telephone experiment. It's again taken from a daily life experience. The phone is ringing, and sometimes you have a very strong idea who's on the phone, and you're right. Okay? So this is, I think everybody has experienced that. But of course, then sometimes, you know, your friend said he wanted to phone this evening, and it could be a conventional explanation, and also we have this conventional explanation that if it's such a coincidence that you thought about a person you haven't thought about a long time, and this person calls, you're so baffled by this coincidence that you remember this very strongly. And all the other cases where you thought about somebody and another guy called, you don't remember. Okay, so this is a memory selection bias. So these would be the conventional explanations, but you know, how do you find out? You do an experiment, and that's what Rupert Sheldrake does. And so we set out to replicate it. And I asked a student to do a thesis on that, and to replicate the study. And she found some good results. And we also looked in that case with the hypothesis, are they gifted persons? So sometimes in parapsychology you take just everybody who's interested in these experiments. Sometimes you take a skeptical sample, or sometimes you take a believer sample, sheep and goat we call them, or goat and sheep, the other way around. In that case we also looked on the beliefs of the people and also on their prior performance, because some people say there are people who consistently perform better than chance, while others are sometimes better than chance, but then again they're performing like chance. So we were looking for patterns like that. And in this first experiment we found, I think 2 persons, if I remember it right, that scored extremely well. So we did replications with them, and one of them maintained, and we did a third experiment with her, and in all 3 experiments she repeatedly could guess the caller in a controlled situation better than chance.